Former President Donald Trump sat in a courtroom Tuesday to face charges against him for the second time in a little over 2 months. He pleaded not guilty to 37 criminal charges that he unlawfully kept national security documents when he left office and lied to officials who sought to recover them. Wearing a blue suit and a red tie, Trump frowned and leaned back in his chair but did not speak during the 47-minute hearing, which was closed to cameras.
I think it's a rigged deal here. We have a rigged country. We have a country that's corrupt.
It was a contrast to later in the afternoon when Trump appeared more spirited as he met with supporters and staff at a Cuban restaurant in Miami in an unexpected stop after his arraignment. Trump was allowed to leave court without conditions or travel restrictions, and no cash bond was required. The judge in the case also ruled that he was not allowed to communicate with potential witnesses. It sets up a long legal battle as Trump, the frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination, campaigns to win back the presidency in a November 2024 election. Experts say it could be a year or more before a trial takes place. Trump's spokesperson and lawyer, Alina Habba, called Trump defiant and the prosecution by the Justice Department politically motivated.
The people in charge of this country do not love America. They hate Donald Trump. What we are witnessing today is the blatant and unapologetic weaponization of the criminal justice system.
Trump has repeatedly proclaimed his innocence and accused Democratic President Joe Biden's administration of targeting him. He called special counsel Jack Smith, who is leading the prosecution, a Trump hater on social media on Tuesday. Smith accuses Trump of risking national secrets by taking thousands of sensitive papers with him when he left the White House in January 2021 and storing them in a haphazard manner at his Mar-a-Lago, Florida estate and his New Jersey golf club, according to a grand jury indictment released last week. Photos included in the indictment show boxes of documents stored on a ballroom stage, in a bathroom, and strewn across a storage room floor. The charges include violations of the Espionage Act, which criminalizes unauthorized possession of defense information, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. That is the maximum sentence he faces, as he would serve any sentences concurrently if convicted. Legal experts say the evidence amounts to a strong case, and Smith has said Trump will have a speedy trial. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of Trump supporters cheered as he came and went, while others expressed their opposition to the former president and his actions. Trump's former aide Walt Nauta also faces charges in the documents case. Tuesday marked the second courtroom appearance for Trump this year. In April, he pleaded not guilty to state charges in New York stemming from a hush money payment to a porn star.
This is a hugely significant development. It's the first time in American history that a former president has been indicted on federal charges, and it comes shortly on the heels of the first time in American history that a former president had been indicted on state charges. The walls around former President Trump are closing in from a legal perspective. These are very serious charges, and they're also the kind of charges that, if the federal prosecutors and the Department of Justice are bringing them, as they clearly now are likely to be particularly easy to prove if, in fact, the Department of Justice has decided that these are charges that they want to bring, which they have. Well, if you lie to federal prosecutors, it doesn't matter if you're the former president of the United States. And that's actually, while this is a serious and somber occasion, it's actually an example of one of the positives of America: accountability to the rule of law, even at the highest levels. And in fact, it was striking to witness that when he was indicted in New York on the charges arising out of the Stormy Daniels affair and the classification of those expenditures, his poll numbers actually improved. Now, is that causation or is it merely correlation? It's very, very difficult to say. But one thing that we have learned over the last couple of years in particular is that the normal rules, the normal political assumptions that apply seemingly don't apply in the same way to Donald Trump. His supporters rallied around him after those New York charges. It will be interesting to see what not only his supporters, but his fellow Republicans in Congress and his fellow Republican candidates for the presidency have to say about this in the coming days. Now, does it mean that he can't run for president? No. We live in a country where, in the United States, rightly or wrongly, a convicted felon, even if he's convicted, can be elected president. He could even, in theory, serve as president while incarcerated. So he announced on one of his social media platforms, he released a video, and of course, it's straight out of the Donald Trump playbook. It's, this is a hoax, they're attacking me, this is a political vendetta, it's a witch hunt. It's the usual repertoire of his, comments. In my view, this is a victory for the rule of law. It's a step towards accountability. If the average rank and file citizen had done any of the things that are detailed in this very careful, very thorough federal indictment, they would not see the light of day. Donald Trump, if anything, is being treated extra cautiously by the Department of Justice here.
It's still a very strong case from an evidentiary perspective. You have the pictures and the indictments. You have Trump being recorded, making admissions, and also his own posts on social media where he says, I knew these documents were classified. I have a right to have them. The problem is that legal argument fails. You're admitting knowledge and intent. So the question is, are we going to find 12 impartial jurors who are going to follow the law, apply the facts? And if so, we may see a guilty verdict here.
The next step is really a determination that is up to the defendant. Donald Trump, in his public remarks, has said that he would like a speedy trial. And if he actually demands a speedy trial, then he's entitled to a very, very rapid process. I don't think there's a chance in the world that his public remarks and his private litigation strategy will square up at all. I think he will file motions to suppress evidence. I think he will file motion after motion in order to try and drag this case out.
Well, it's tough to say when the trial will happen. Obviously, Donald Trump wants to push this past the November 2024 election. And the reason is this. It's well established that no sitting president can be prosecuted. So if he wins, the case goes away. Even if another Republican like DeSantis wins, I would expect that they would try to fire special counsel Jack Smith for good cause. So I think delay is Trump's friend in this case. Of course, if a trial happens earlier, it could certainly affect the results of the election. And if we do get 12 jurors that are willing to just follow the evidence, this may be a case where Trump not only gets convicted, he gets actual prison time.
It only takes one juror on a jury of his peers to vote for acquittal in order for the defendant to be acquitted. If you get 3 or 4 hardcore Trump supporters who think he can do no wrong, who serve on that jury, that's going to be a very, very tall task for prosecutors, because we've already seen time and again that no amount of fact, no amount of analysis can alter the view that this is a man who can do no wrong.
It won't be easy to find a fair and impartial jury. Everyone in the United States has heard about this case and has some preconceived notion about Donald Trump and whether he's guilty or not. The challenge will be to find jurors that are willing to follow the law, that aren't going to bring their own views into this case. And the potential for jury nullification is real, especially in a case like Florida, which throughout American history has been the most notoriously difficult to predict.
One thing we've learned, his poll numbers and his fundraising went up in the aftermath of the New York indictment. I'd be surprised if his poll numbers and his fundraising numbers don't go up in the wake of the federal indictment, which is really a statement. It's an indication that we have entered the upside down in American politics, when being indicted actually strengthens your pull with your base of support. It's a state of affairs that many people thought we'd never see.
Trump can be under federal indictment. He can even be convicted and in federal prison and still be president of the United States, theoretically. There's nothing that prohibits a convicted felon from holding federal public office, with some few exceptions, none of which were charged in this case. Now, of course, Trump is playing to his base. He's looking to regain the White House in 2024. And this may be good on the campaign trail, but Trump's statements will certainly hurt him in the courtroom, and they can't help him. Under the rules of evidence, those types of statements can be only used against you. You can't introduce your out-of-court statements because that's hearsay.
So there's a rule in American law that says that a judge shall be disqualified, meaning recused, if their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. So I tend to turn that statement around into a question. Might it be reasonable to question Judge Cannon's impartiality? To me, the answer to might it be reasonable is yes.
This is one of those cases where the cover-up is worse than the crime. The Espionage Act charges, the substantive charges, only carry a 10-year maximum sentence. But it's those obstruction charges, the willfully concealing documents from the grand jury, the tampering, and affecting a federal investigation. Those charges carry a 20-year statutory maximum because they are the most serious charges. You can't just ignore a grand jury subpoena. That's unlawful. I think a guilty verdict will be a huge day in American history. A conviction of a former president is unprecedented. And the question will be, will Judge Cannon actually sentence him to prison time? The advisory guideline range will call for at least a 4-year sentence in federal prison. I think under those circumstances, there will be a lot of pressure on Judge Cannon to send Trump to prison.
My man, I'm never gonna fight. What a great group of people. What a great group. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you. New York Times.